Hello, I'm Gundar Oswald, the program manager for the Chesapeake chapter, and we brought to you today some inputs from the Department of Defense on how to apply model-based system engineering and what their view is and how it should be used. So let's invite Phil Zimmerman to give us some information on that.
Very humbled to be here. The work that we do in the Department of Defense often doesn't get spoken about favorably, so I hope that I can change your opinion about that. A little bit about me. I've been working as a contractor and as a government employee my entire career. It's about 35 years long. And I really have one of those jobs where I can honestly say that everything I have done in my career has brought me here, right? Everything is very relevant, but to let you know the type of person I am, perhaps the most relevant skill that I bring to the table is that I'm the mother of 4 children. And so I want to, I don't mean this to be lighthearted, but I think this is a really enjoyable topic, and I hope that you enjoy it as well. And, you know, ask me questions, stop however you want to do it. But with that, let's get started. So I call this Getting Started 101 because when we brought the concept of digital engineering out in the system engineering department in AT&L, people were curious as to what it was, right? Well, I do this model-based stuff, right? Is that part of it? Well, I'm an M&S guy, which by the way drives me crazy, but I'm an M&S guy. Is that part of it? I'm a program manager. How do I use it? So I put some thoughts together about what this means to you when you see the term digital engineering, right? So I can tell you that, without a doubt, I can tell just by looking at the audience that you're all already here. You're all already doing digital engineering. And if at the end you still don't believe you're doing digital engineering, come talk to me and we'll get it straightened out, right? So the obligatory slide, for those of you who are familiar with laws, you'll know that we will not look like this for very long. The AT&L organization, one of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense is for Systems Engineering. That position is currently held by Kristen Baldwin. She's the acting. And we just appointed a new AT&L, Miss Lord. You probably saw it in the papers if you read any of that stuff. But one of the things that's going to happen in February is that we're going to change, right? We have been told to split the organization. And so the organization will be split along 2 lines, and system engineering will not appear in the new organization because, drum roll please, system engineering is a part of everything we do. Right? So I really think that the new organization internalizes that, but I want to talk to you about this because it sets the stage for something very important. On your left-hand side of the chart, Mr. Thompson leads what's called the Major Program Support Team. These are the people who are charged with the statutory and regulatory duties assigned to looking at major defense acquisition programs. And I'm going to apologize right up front, right? I'm a defense guy. I've been a defense guy all my life. I married an Air Force officer. I'm the mother of an enlisted soldier. I live and breathe defense. So if I say something you don't understand, just ask me. But on the left-hand side, all the statutory and regulatory rules that deal with how the programs evolve, how they're costed, what their system engineering posture looks like, what their critical technologies are, their Nunn-McCurdy breaches and stuff. Basically, if you have seen it in the newspaper, good or bad, it probably belongs in Mr. Thompson's world. It's very important for one very, very good reason. And that is that those are the people who actually practice, right? Those people talk to the program managers, talk to the system engineers, talk to industry. This is where we get all of our practice from. So everything that I'm going to tell you about the right-hand side of the chart, and I live at the bottom because they saved the best until last. Okay. But everything that I'm going to talk to you on the right-hand side derives from the practice that happens on the left-hand side. And while we work on engineering practices in general, we often support major program support. We often have demand signals from major program support. So there's a really nice synergy that goes on in this organization. So Mr. Gold's organization, and I know he's spoken at a couple of NCOSE meetings, Mr. Gold's organization works on things like policy, guidance, advanced engineering practice, not so advanced engineering practice, specialty engineering, security, standardization, et cetera. We work on all of the methods, processes, and sometimes tools that support all of the major programs in the Department of Defense from a system engineering standpoint. So question number one is, how do you recognize what you're doing model-based? Now, I put this slide in here, and don't think less of me, but most of my 35-year career has been spent in the modeling and simulation community. Building it, caring for it, most importantly, using it. And it's the use that becomes really important when you think about model-based. If you develop a SysML model of something, but you put it on a shelf, I contend you're not doing digital engineering. If you build a SysML model or a UML model or a comma-separated values file or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever you want of something and you put it to use, now you're doing digital engineering, right? Engineering is a very activity-based function. So what we started with was, I started from an M&S posture, and I don't like that term, by the way, but I started from what you would traditionally call M&S. And the reason that I don't like that term is because it doesn't respect the independent disciplines that go into models and simulations. And once you take it apart, there's something common between models and simulation and model-based system engineering, and I wonder what that could be. So we focused on it, but we actually found out that the model wasn't the common part. What was really common was, how am I using them, right? It's the use that becomes very important. So I put this in because most of my friends are from the M&S community, right? And so they want to know, hey, are we doing this model-based stuff? And I said, well, I don't know. Are you using it? Or are you just developing it and sitting it on the shelf? So model-based system engineering, in my terminology, is not the same as traditional M&S, right? In one very important thing. Model-based focuses on integrating or using the model, right? You don't just do a SysML model because it's fun. Playing with the tools is cool, but it's not the point. And model-based makes a clear distinction between models and simulations, right? So a model is key to both. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a model. A model is a representation of reality. Is there anybody here who disputes that statement? See, you can't lose at this job, right? Model is a representation of reality, and it's static, right? It holds state. It is, right? If you change something in the model, the new model that emerges is different from the model before it, right? It doesn't do anything. In and of itself, it's pretty uninteresting. A simulation is separate. A simulation is a model executed over time. Does anybody dispute that statement? Right, again, well, okay. We can talk about it afterwards if you want, but let's, for the sake of argument, let's go with my definition. So a simulation is a model executed over time, right? But what's really important about all this, and this takes us back to model-based, is that if you get the model wrong, you're going to get the simulation wrong, right? So let's focus on model, right? That brings in the model-based system engineering, model-based engineering, model-based test, model-based manufacturing, model-based procurement, model-based contracting, model-based design, model-based X, right? You put your favorite activity after it. By the way, I'm remodeling my house, and I modeled my, anyway. So you want to concentrate your efforts on the model correctness. It has to be fit for the purpose that you intend to use it for. And most importantly, and when we've gone out and we've talked to programs about what model-based system engineering or how this evolves into digital engineering, is that the model is a continuum, right? The model doesn't just exist and then get put on the shelf. I've done that in my life. It's really not very satisfying, right? I've also tried to get models from other people, and I haven't been able to obtain them, so I have to start from scratch. That's just silly, right? So let's stop that practice. So now you're getting into why digital engineering is important, right? Model is the continuum. It's the technical source of truth. If I, let's see, anybody a GIS guy in here? Oh, good, then I can use this one safely. 0, 0, 0 in Earth-centered or fixed coordinates is the center of the Earth, right? It's a model, right? It's a triplet, but it's a model. The spreadsheet that I might have to track attendees is a model of who attended the meeting, right? So unfortunately now you're going to turn around and everything's going to be a model for you, so I'm going to apologize for that up front. But the models evolve as you use them, whether you're using them in Department of Defense systems or whether you're using them, by the way, to track a patient. There's actually a digital model being developed by a series of medical hospitals, and if you push me, I can probably come up with the doctor who was doing it. But the models evolve over time. If you have a model of a human being and he breaks his arm, you probably want to note that in his file, right? Well, the file is just a model of what has occurred to the human being. So keep that notion in mind. It establishes cohesion across uses. It is your source of truth. So that becomes really important as we go forward. So now how do you recognize digital engineering, and why do we not call it model-based? Mr. Stephen Welby was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, and prior to taking that job, he had the position that Ms. Baldwin holds now. And Mr. Welby he had a great sense of humor, but he would often come up to me and he would look at me and he'd go, Phil, you know, he'd say, I'm an engineer and I use models all the time, but you're from the M&S community and I don't really understand what this M&S is, so could you help me just figure this out? So that's a pretty, you know, when your boss's boss comes up and talks to you, it's a pretty good clue that there's probably a hint in there somewhere. So we started to look at this thing called model-based. It was about, probably about 7 years ago that we started down this path. We started looking at model-based and its relationship to the traditional M&S community. We came, you know, with the big aha moments of both of them use models, et cetera, et cetera. And so we started to put some thoughts together. And when we put the thoughts together, Mr. Welby says, you know, model's not the important thing here. He said, I'm an engineer, I use models all the time, but what's our real leap ahead is going to become when we take the model and we make it computational or able to be used in a computation without human intervention. He said, when we start to use the digital capabilities that we have today, then we're going to get the gigantic leap ahead in our system development over time. And remember, well, maybe you don't know, I come from acquisition technology and logistics. I'm concerned about the entire life cycle, concept to disposal. If I can now start to help me, through models, understand what the system looks like, I don't have to do things like build one and then blow it up, right? If I can understand the physics, I ought to be able to model that whole process or parts of that process. So it puts a tremendous strain on our modeling community because we don't have a lot of the physics defined. We have some of it. But it also provides great promise to us as designers, as testers, and how we can use the model as that continuum. So if I know what my requirements look like, and I know how I want my test plan to evolve, I can actually start to use the model of my system to verify my requirements, check out my design, and it evolves, it's cohesively used, and then actually use it in test. I come out of the aircraft community. If it doesn't fly, we don't buy. So I'm not at all suggesting that we would eliminate any of the coupon testing or hardware testing that we would do. But I am saying that we can be smarter about where we apply our resources. So let's do the math. If a model is a representation of reality, and if you constrain the model to be those things which are computational or used in a computation, and if you accept that digital engineering uses computers to actually help us do our job, then digital engineering is nothing more than relating computers to help us do our engineering job with models. That's all it is, right? Now you can all fall asleep after this because it doesn't get any more stunning than this, right? If you don't get it, you are probably overthinking the problem. It's like, to me, it's like chemistry. Chemistry is a math problem, right? If you don't get it, you are overthinking the problem. This is very simple, but it's very powerful because what digital engineering combines is the model, the computer, and then that thought of cohesion, that thought of being able to keep technical continuity as I understand it. And you can do it with data, you can do it with processes, you can do it with algorithms. Right, so I'm a DoD guy, right? How do I pick up a gun, right? Well, you know, the soldier has to bend over, he has to find the gun, bend over. There's a whole process step. F equals MA is an algorithm. It's a computable function. 0, 0, 0 is something that can be consumed by a computation. All those things apply. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get all of our engineering and other artifacts transitioned into this world where we can use them in a computational device. The nice thing about computers is that they do a lot of things naturally, right? Our computers have become sophisticated enough that you don't even think about the fact that when you change something, the computer tracks some element of that change history. We don't use that. Computers can transform things, right? Add 0.1 to every value in my table. I don't know why you add 0.1 to every value in the table, right? The result is a known quantity because I had a transformation function on a set of data. There's no question, computers don't lie, right? It is what 1 is 1 is 1, 2 is 2 is 2. So it actually helps us by its very nature, and we want to be able to build and expand on that for the Department of Defense. I'd go back, but I can't. Actually, could you go back a slide? Oh, I will come up. Oh, there you go. Okay. So think about the things that you have at the bottom here, right? So I want to subsample on a table, right? If I have the table computationally and I can put the subsampling into some kind of formula, I can execute a process, or put it into some kind of process step, I can actually do that, again, in a computer. I'm removing the human, I'm removing a source of risk for us. That's all very important. We were talking earlier, cost assessment and program evaluation, the CAPE organization within OSD, actually is moving all of their cost data into a computable environment. It's called the Cost Assessment Data Environment. It's a clever name. They actually are looking at that, and they actually overlap with some of the technical parameters that we believe we need to be able to keep, that the program manager needs to be able to keep. So we can now start to do things like accurately cost what we want to build. Who doesn't think that's a good idea, right? Yeah, that's a great face, right? I wish I could do it. But it's like this just blinding flash of the obvious. If we get the computer out of the way where he doesn't need to, or get the human out of the way where he doesn't need to be, we can actually get some leap ahead. We believe we can get our programs, our systems to operate more as we expect, right? We can actually track evolutionary change. We can understand the flexibility of our systems, and who hasn't, well, I shouldn't ask this question, but who hasn't heard of people putting things on the internet that they regret? Right? So we want to be able to take advantage of just those things that come from being in a digital world. So you probably have digital engineering ongoing now, right? I guarantee you, who's a student, right? I'm not, actually. It was a long time ago I was a student. Do you use a computer? Oh, there you go. You're in digital engineering. Congratulations. You're one of the team. You didn't even know it. Digital engineering has a definition. It's an integrated approach that uses authoritative sources of truth as a continuum across disciplines. For those of you who are not familiar, the Department of Defense has probably 15 competencies that work in the acquisition workforce, right? We are all related. We often don't talk to each other, sadly. But now we can start to use this digits, these tables, these process and algorithms as technical means of communication. F equals MA is F equals MA. It's a truth. It doesn't change whether you look at it from a cost perspective or you look at it from an engineering perspective. So we really want to just get to these fundamental sources of truth. The key is computation or used in a computation. If you have a CSV file, if you've done anything on an Excel spreadsheet, you have a model. Traditional modeling and simulation, that M&S thing that I don't like, right? For those of you who are familiar with some of the more traditional models, they have processes, data, and likely algorithms all in the same thing. They fit the model. They still play. Executable SysML is a collection of models. Electronic schedule is likely a model. That's another good one. Integrated master schedules are what we work with in the Department of Defense. What happens is that they're kept in a computer. They often track packages. They often are related to the way we track earned value in our system. But when I have to check, I take a snapshot of the schedule and I put it in a document. A couple weeks later, somebody else has to check in a different discipline, and they take a snapshot of the schedule that has advanced in time, and they put it in a document, and lo and behold, now we have two different schedules describing the same program. That's really not true, but that's the way it presents when you remove it from an executable format. A set of computer steps that will teach you how to build a document from your tables. We know a lot about doing that, right? That's also a model. I'm not in additive manufacturing, but it doesn't take a lot to know that 3D printing works off of models. It probably works out of something that I would refer to as an outer mold line of what you want to build. Set of processes for how to move the heads, and probably algorithms that determine how thick to lay on the substrates. Models. All models drive that. They drive subtractive manufacturing as well. So they're pervasive. How do we harness the power? So the obligatory digital engineering slide that is, got fancy graphics along the bottom. But we use stovepipe data sources when we build our systems in the Department of Defense, right? There's no reason for that, but, well, I'm sure people thought were valid reasons at the time, but we need to start removing that rationale if we can. Current practice relies on standalone models. I worked on a very large Army program recently, well, 10 years ago, that actually had models that were done to do a lot of conceptual analysis up front. They produced, they ran some data, they wrote a report, tied the information up, tied the data up with a bow, put that on the shelf and gave me the report. I don't want the report, right? Because now I have to fat finger those numbers back in to hopefully recreate a file. Another example that I have, it's probably a little dated, is the production of blueprints, right? 2D drawings usually come from a 3D model. They have only 2 dimensions, but they get volume when you stack them together. Oh, God, okay. Anyway, when you hand them over to a manufacturing, they read in all the 2D drawings and try to recreate the 3D model that created it in the first place, right? Why do we do this, right? We need to stop doing these insane things. So the future state is digital engineering moves towards an integrated model-based approach, right? Model is key, it's the continuum, integrated. I don't want these things to be stovepiped anymore. I want them to be cohesively used. It links data sources and models across the life cycle to provide an authoritative source of truth of whatever you're building. So to support this, we've actually written a couple of guidance, right? I like to think that in the Department of Defense, especially when you work at OSD, you get credit for putting words on paper. So we get credit for writing these down. We don't get credit, they aren't stunning, but they are what I call, there happen to be 8 of them, although I think we just came up with a 9, but they are the V8 moments in digital engineering, right? If a program manager owns the program, he probably owns the data that goes with the program. Nobody's written it down before, we did. You ought to train people in the use of the tools that you're going to have to manipulate these models, to produce these models. You can delegate it to a chief systems engineer if you want. Systems simulations and tools should have an established level of trust. There's a lot of things that we don't know about what a model-based community is going to look like, but we know that we have a number of challenge areas. I'll touch on VV&A to start with, and I know that Johns Hopkins actually does a lot of VV&A work. It's very important. However, making sure that I built the right thing and that I built it right isn't if I've done that, I work with some wonderful physics-based models. We talk about God does our validation at that point. But if you don't trust the model, you're still not going to use it. So there are other elements that we know besides the technical things of validation and verification that we know we need to work on. So we're looking for some research and discovery, and we've got a whole list of research areas. The program should update the system model and maintain configuration management, but how do you do that when you're maintaining a technical source of truth about a design that's changing maybe every second? So we don't know how to handle configuration management. Maybe we need to think about it differently. One of the challenges that we're soon going to face is if we move to a model-based environment or an event, right? I worked on this very large army with one of my closest friends that I didn't know. All got in a room in one particular OEM, and we worked for a week to talk about how wonderful we are and that the design was ready to move to the next phase. Right, we did it with pictures, but what was important was not the event. What was important was the 18 months of run-up where we did all the integration preparing for the event. No longer have that integration. So there's a number of things that we need to think about in engineering and in acquisition as we go forward. Because we are a very document-based organization that I work for in the Department of Defense, we started a set of views, and this chart will never be right and it will never be complete, but just bear with me for just the speech. It tries to the acquisition view, to the documents that are required to meet a particular checkpoint, we call them milestones. and then eventually to the model view, right? So we want to have a way to help the transition, because stop doing our traditional acquisition system tonight and then tomorrow emerge in this digital world, right? That's just not going to happen. So we have to provide a means for transition. We don't have all of, again, we don't have all of this worked out, but it should be able to be worked out. Our processes have been in use for 30 or 40 years. We know what the process looks like. We know what our models are capable of. We know a lot about organizing our data. Right? So this is not an impossibility. It's one of the things actually that we know we need to do. We also aren't doing this alone. Remember that statement about how government OSD employees, well, we wrote a lot of things down. The fundamentals were good enough to catch the attention of the people who were rewriting the defense acquisition guidance at the time, chapter 4, now chapter 3. We took advantage of that, right? Still nothing in policy, but we took advantage of that, and we made modeling to be a tool, not M&S to be something that's used to support tests, but we actually discussed models as an independent tool to be used by a variety of people from an engineering perspective. Mr. Kendall, when he was the ATNL, took a Christmas break term policy, which is 5000.02, and the story that was told to me was that in the system engineering enclosure, we were asked to put 4 sentences about the use of models and simulations. And the story that was told to me was that Mr. Kendall had comments on every one of the paragraphs except ours. So I'm going to stick with that. I don't know if it's true or not. But we now have a traceability from policy, although we did it backwards, we have a traceability from policy, guidance, recommendations, and now we're actually separate. We have a number of initiatives that continue to go on. We love working with NASA. Sounding rocket program flies off of Wallops Island. I work for the Department of Defense. We build major wind systems. We go from concept to time to ramp in about 18 years. They go from concept to launch in about 18 months. So I get to see a full turn of an engineering cycle on a product to include validation. And they have metrics. They do these launches frequently every year off of Wallops Island. And they have metrics that tracks how long it takes them to do it in a traditional sense. And they are now starting to put digital practices into that process itself. And the anecdotal number that I just heard from the tech fellow at NASA headquarters was that they achieved a 650% improvement in the time to get it to the flight pad. We do a lot with the System Engineering Research Center. It's a 22, I think, affiliated universities led by the Stevens Institute of Technology. They do a lot of research for us in this area. I do a lot with Engineered Resilient Systems, which is a Department of Defense program run out of the Army Corps of Engineers in Vicksburg, Mississippi. They actually look at complex data sets, big data analytics. They use physics-based models to do a lot of their work. If anybody wants more information, I can put you in touch with them. We actually have a digital system model, and my boss will tell me that I have low culinary standards, but we ate our own dog food on this one. So we took a set, organizing principles of the set of data that's actually used at the top level to model a system. And at first we tracked it in an Excel spreadsheet. Then that got a little complicated, and so we started to use a mind mapping tool. And then that got a little onerous, and so we finally bit the bullet and we actually modeled it. And so we put the top level data organization for the programs in the Department of Defense into a SysML model. We actually have it. Now, interesting, we had to get it cleared for public affairs so we could share it. Public affairs couldn't open it. They stamped it FOUO, so I've got a little bit of work to do. But what we did, and so this is why I recommended the book Crossing the Chasm, right? I did it along the work breakdown structure for the Department of Defense. Why is that important? Because I've got to convince the program managers they want to take on this new engineering practice in some cases, and I've got to speak to them in their language. So the work breakdown structure is the language that the program manager speaks. If I can start to organize my data in a way that he can understand, then he's more likely to accept it, right? We've actually got this in use on 2 major programs today. Now, it only goes down 4 levels. The details are not my job. Right, I work for the Department of Defense, not the services. The services have to work out what those details look like. And I run a digital engineering working group. If you're interested in learning how we make sausage at the Department of Defense to get this into practice, you're welcome to join us. Just give me your card afterwards. It's largely it's a government-run organization. I have all the service, system engineering office participate. I have a number of OEMs and some academia and some professional societies do participate. May not understand a lot of what's going on. We are the Department of Defense, so sometimes we move real quick, sometimes not so fast. But it is the way that we're going to get this digital engineering strategy talked about. And then I have a number of partnerships that we work with, right? So we're not doing this alone. This is not something that I'm inventing on my way home every night. This is actually practices that we are observing, that we are looking at in programs that people don't even know fits into the digital engineering community. There are model-based practices, there are M&S practices, there are cost accounting practices. All of those fit in here. And what we are trying to do is provide enough umbrella coverage so that people will begin to share across those boundaries. So we can actually start to use these models as technical means of communication. And we have a strategy that we've been told to roll out. This should come out early next year. It's due in its final draft, coordinated form across my services to Ms. Baldwin. I have a small team working on this, and they did a tremendous amount of research, and they came up with these 5 the what's that people have to do, right? And enterprises, organizations, in my world, services or agencies have to do to maintain a digital ecosystem for use in their organization. Nobody done this before. People have written strategies, but nobody had looked at it like this before. And quite by accident, somebody sent me General Electric's digital transformation playbook. You can Google it. They have the same 5 categories here. So we got some unintended, and actually, when we contacted GE, they were very excited to work with us. It was really very flattering. But we got some independent verification that we're on the right path. And so we have a larger strategy that we have to work on. But most importantly, it talks about we have to formalize these use of models, right? We have 4 sentences in policy. Is it enough? I don't know the answer to that question. We're going to talk about the what has to be done. The services and the agencies have to talk about the how. They have to own it, and they have to put it in words that relates to their user community. Want to provide an enduring, authoritative source of truth, not singular, but the models provide that source of truth, right? They have to be computed on. They are what they are. 1 is 1 is 1. It doesn't change. We want to be able to incorporate technological innovation. So what does the cloud after next look like? How does this digital engineering ecosystem take advantage of that? We want to make sure that people open their thinking to these new and not so new ideas. We know that you have to have an infrastructure and environment. That's kind of one of those V8 moments, but we thought we ought to get it written down so people can start to go back to their bosses and say, you know, you really do need to open up that port for me. I really do need to be able to work this. And then last but not least, I have to transform culture and workforce. And we actually drew the graphic very carefully. Culture and workforce comes last, but if you don't do it, none of the others are supportable in the digital engineering ecosystem. So what's in a name, right? How do you get more information on this, right? Well, just recall it's digital engineering, right? Digital, right? Engineering, doing things. We have the vision, we have the fundamentals. All of those are available to you from the DAS-DSE website. We're doing multiple activities. We're building the strategy. We have the starter kit that's still not cleared for public release. The professional organizations and COSI, that's why I'm here today. I can give you points of contact. If you're working in a service, you don't know who to talk to, whatever, you can get to me. If I can connect you, I will. Original equipment manufacturers, all of our big industrial partners, they're all doing this. Some of them are doing it, and they consider it their intellectual property, by the way. I can go see it, but nobody else can. So people actually have embraced this. Some corporations have gone corporation-wide to include all of their human resources work. Some of them are just keeping it within the engineering. We have integrating frameworks. We have both formal and informal standards. We have the traditional M&S community, which should not be dismissed by any means. They have a tremendous amount to bring forward to this and things that we can build on. And then services and yourselves, academia. So where do you begin? Again, think about, so I ran into this today. I had the real pleasure of spending 2 days with Research Development Engineering Command up at Aberdeen. And they were trying to come to grips with what this digital engineering meant to them. And somebody, actually a very good friend of mine, asked, well, how much does this cost? I didn't know how to answer them, because it shouldn't cost you anything to discover that which you are already doing. right? So first, it starts with figure out where you have pockets of modeling practice already. And think about how you can use the model, this technical means of communication, whether it's data or algorithm, to bridge two disciplines, right? Why do people look in two different databases for the same information? Where are your decisions so complex that you can't help but model these, right? That's another good place to look. Now, imagine that you had to present your results to your professor or to your boss, and you didn't have any of the Microsoft or Apache Open Office suites. How would you convey the results, right? I was actually briefing at DAU, and I actually was briefing a group of rocket scientists. I had a major from NRO, and he came to me and he says, you know, you're not telling me anything that I don't already do. What's different? And I'd never had that question before, and I started to sweat a little bit. And then I noticed he was working on his computer, and I said, how do you convey your results to your boss? And he says, well, I put them on a PowerPoint chart. I said, well, what if you didn't? What if you took the actual simulation in and showed your boss? What if you printed out a table, or what if you gave him a visualization print? And he got really excited and he said, can I do that? I said, I don't know, you have to ask your boss. But my point is, we've got to find a natural digital way to do this, right? Either auto magically generate your PowerPoint slides and your documents. I mean, that may be the first transition step, but how do we start communicating digitally? And how do we start trusting? What do we need to do to trust that digital transmission? I don't know. Digital engineering strategy published. This is something that system engineering and AT&L wants. It may go higher than that. I've got an engineering problem I have to solve. I have to finish the starter kit. I have to work on my program engagement. One of the questions that we used to ask when we would do the program reviews, that left-hand side of the chart that I spoke about, is do you have 70% of your drawing package? And the problem now is that the answer is coming back, I don't know, I got a model, right? What does 70% of your model look? I don't know how to answer that question, so we have to work on those. We need help looking at that. I need to update my competencies, right? The people that contribute to my acquisition process. I need to update policy and guidance everywhere, depending upon how high this goes. And then the thing that keeps me awake at night is that I have to transform acquisition process, because I'm an engineer, right? I work in engineering. My engineering supports acquisition. It does not do acquisition. But we need to get this in practice across the other competencies. I'm somewhere between understanding and initial use. Some people would argue I'm between initial use and internalization. I'm not sure yet. But we have a lot of things that we know we need to do, and then we need to sustain this and continue to evolve it. And that's it. Sorry I walked around so much. Thanks. Any questions? Sure. No questions about SysML or UML. Okay. Yeah, not in this audience, but I thought I had to put that on the table.
Yeah, there you go, thanks. Actually, I was hoping that you would walk through your views slide and talk about how you plan to move from documents to
Oh, that's a really good question. Can you go back to the transition slide? Maybe 4, 5. Keep going. Back, 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 back. That one. Nope, that one. So that's an interesting thing. I'm going to tell you, I don't know that I can answer that question specifically, because we got sidetracked from doing this transition to work on the strategy, right? To set this umbrella, the what needs to be done so the services and agencies can put the how in place. But where this started was, we started with the data view, right? I came off this major Army program, and I was the system engineer. My last job was I was in charge of system engineering, and I needed to get a hold of what the technical data about the program looked like. By that, we were many years into the program. Nobody wanted to give me their data, so people were making it up, right? Gets in the press, it's just nasty. So we started with the data view, and we quickly glommed onto the WBS. As my team was working that, one of the things that I said to them was, you know, all of the data that we judge our programs about are actually contained in documents. Aha. So then they added a document view, right? So we look at things like initial capabilities document. We look at capability production documents for those numbers. So we know we're pretty safe with that mapping. When we developed the data view, though, and the other reason I'm really glad you asked this question is because I don't think I mentioned it. When we developed the data view, we looked at it not from, hi, I'm from OSD, what data do you consider important to your tank? What we asked them was, what do you do? What activities do you do? What data do you consume and what data do you produce? Because if the data is not used, it's probably not important. Somebody's got to use it. So we created the data view from that. We figured out where they were located in the documents, right? So that actually goes down one. The acquisition view was actually the last one that we laid in, surprisingly. So, and the model view came out actually to help us build this transition into model-based, to be blunt. But we know that it's very easy to line up acquisition and document, right? Because we are a document-based acquisition process. It's a little harder to pull all of that data out. So we have a couple ways that we're going to try to do that. One is to look at the data item descriptions, right? And the nice thing about that is that that's what we contract for. So where do they appear on the contracts? When do they become enforced? We believe will give us a hint to that. The other thing is testing. Testing is a nice activity because it falls all the way towards the right. So does manufacturing, right? Those are end games for us in the data world. Those are the people who are actually consuming this data to build something, to sustain something. When we tried to look at that activity-based world, in the middle, in our engineering, EMD, and TMRR phase, it's really chaotic. Nobody has a list of the activities. So we used the data points at the end and the data that's important to help us inform the organization in the middle. So it's not a perfect answer to your question, but we know we can line up data and document really well, and we know we can line up document and acquisition really well. What we don't know is how do we actually translate that into the models that are used? And when do the models need to come to some level of maturity so they can be used in our decisions? It's not a great answer to your question, I'm sorry. It's kind of the way we evolved it, right? But we're not inventing anything new, right? We're really not. We're just trying to make better use of what we have at hand. Is that okay? So at NAVAIR, I would point you to Mr. Jaime Guerrero.
Mm-hmm.
Their work in the SE transformation part for Dave Cohen. That would be the people that I would point you to if you need their contact. They're in global, but I can help you get in touch with them if you'd like.
Okay,
Sir.
I'm going to ask the next question.
Okay.
Industry has model-based engineering, model-based systems.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference between that and digital engineering?
The model-based is actually falls under the umbrella of digital engineering, right? So model-based will work, but so will the data that comes out of a simulation run, which is not necessarily a model in the current vernacular. But I'm also glad you brought that up. One of the biggest thing from our industry partners that we've talking to them about, and they're very open about this with us, it's actually really flattering. They would like to know how we can use the models to cross the government industry boundary. And so when we started to think about that, if you just take a data, right? So take all of the data that's required to build, I don't know, an M1A2 tank, right? You look at all of the data that's required, some of it is intellectual property, I'm sure. It has to be, just by sheer numbers. But how do we actually know that it's intellectual property? How do we in the government actually judge? Well, it turns out if you start with this data organization from the beginning, you can actually tag the elements. So you can tag the elements for security purposes. You can tag them for intellectual property purposes. And so now we can actually tighten up the negotiations. And our belief from our intellectual property attorney, who's actually was an engineer before he became an attorney, is that we ought to be able to use that now to have tighter discussions, or worse yet, tighter arguments about what's intellectual property and what's not, what was paid for by the government, what was not. So they're actually using model-based. They actually use it in most of their developments. They've been using it for 20 years. They've been using models, I should say, right? Model-based engineering is the use of models to do their engineering functions. Digital engineering takes those models and wants to make better use of them cohesively. So that's the answer to your question, but industry would like to be able to use models to cross that boundary with us. And so what we're trying to do with digital engineering is sort of to plow the ground, right? Make it ready to receive those. Okay? Sir. Sorry, gentleman in the, hold on one second. Gentleman in the back.
That's okay. Did you run into any class of systems or problems where model-based or digital engineering was inappropriate or too cumbersome?
No, but I would love to. And here's the reason why, right? When when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? I'm kind of in that world right now. Our speculation is that the later you are in the life cycle when you attempt to implement model-based, the lower the return on investment that you will get. That's our speculation. Most of the programs that we're working with right now either are well along the life cycle and wish they had done model-based, or are in the beginning and are trying to start model-based. So I haven't run into them yet, but in the beginning, right, everybody's all this, the hype cycle, right? Everybody's really enthusiastic about it. So I just suspect that they're there, but they either haven't heard of us yet or haven't got enough evidence to prove where it's not worthwhile to use. But I am looking for them. That's the only way we can know how to change or not recommend the practice. So if you got one, I'd love to hear it. Okay, sir.
I was saying on the heels of that last question, when you initially started to explain to us digital engineering, and I was thinking to myself, the way you took us through that and eloquently simplified the definition, I said, well, any modeling system that uses software to model something is inherently a digital engineering. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Right. If you're doing it in a computer and you're doing it with a representation, then it's the digital engineering as far as I'm concerned. Software is an interesting thing. One of the things that we've speculated on, and a couple of the OEMs have come to us and said, and I'm not nearly the photographer that Gunders is, but if you know what a positive and a negative is, if I'm writing a model that's going to help me visualize in a simulation the flight of an aircraft, and I want to make sure that the G-forces are accurately depicted, it's very possible that the inverse of that, the positive to that negative or the negative to that positive, might be the software that could actually do the control algorithms for the flaps and the control surfaces on the aircraft. There's actually a couple of OEMs that are actually exploring that concept. So now could I model everything about my system and then auto-magically work my code, perhaps to give me first order controls of things like that? Sir.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be interested in what you're doing to address a risk that I see kind of in the name of digital engineering that relates back to a couple of decades ago when there was a big push to automate a lot of processes. And what was happening is people would automate a bad process and not, but they made it. So my thought is, what are you doing to mitigate the risk that people will say, oh, I'll just take what I'm doing, even though it may be bad or inadequate, and put it in a computer and I'm done?
So the honest answer is I'm not doing any of that yet, right? I don't have enough digital practice established to even to start thinking about that. Digital engineering has become a thing, an initiative in 2014. So we have so our current acquisition system is about 40 years, right? I'm 3 years into a potentially 40-year cycle. We have a long way to go. I'd be interested if you have any thoughts on how we can weed those out. Right now, we're still in the process of gathering what are those practices that we would like to share and recommend, and how do we get the cohesion. I haven't run into anything, but we are really still in the gathering stage. So as of right now, nothing. Anybody else? Sir.
Right here.
Oh, okay.
Here. Do you have anything in the way of interactions with legislatures and state and regional and local governmental activities and so on? And would you have any tools that have started to be useful in that regard?
I am usually on the receiving end of the legislation. Okay, I'm actually, I work at OSD, that kind of puts me up here, but I'm the lowest rung on that up here level. So I'm usually the recipient. We have not yet matured the thinking or the practice, or frankly, the convincing to our senior leadership that we would even begin to put legislative suggestions forward. Okay, break. Mr. Shanahan is now the Deputy Secretary of Defense, right? And he comes from a model-based digital world. Will that be a tool, not the kind of digital tool that I suspect you were asking about, but will that be something that will enable this going forward into legislation or into policy? I don't know. I would certainly hope so. But as of right now, I'm the recipient of the legislation. I'm not pushing anything forward. Sir.
Anything yet?
There you go.
Related to the view graph up
Mhm.
there. In a formal DoD acquisition, we have to go through milestones.
Yes.
And pretend it's milestone B. There's a stack of documents that need to be delivered.
By the way, I think the number is like 87 by the time you get to production, but
Excellent.
a lot.
There's a lot of commonality among some of the documents and overlap, and I'm wondering if you have an automated tool where the documentation is modeled and you push a button and all the required documents are then printed out.
NASA JPL has actually experimented a little bit with that. They have a freeware tool that's called Doctrine. That's actually how they, as I recall it, how they generate a lot of their supporting documentation for their Europa Clipper pre-project. So yes, I know it's possible. It certainly seems to make sense in the digital world, right? You have a set of processes that say, go get this piece from here and that piece from there. That's a process that is very executable within a computer. Put the boilerplate around, grab a couple things out of your digital system model, and voila, you have a document, right? Will that guarantee the consistency in the documents? Not unless we enforce further controls. So if I have to take, if I'm producing my system engineering plan and I have to take a snapshot of my IMS, and I'm doing it on a Tuesday, but the test and evaluation master plan is being done on a Friday, chances are the schedule will have changed. So we believe there are additional controls that will need to be put in place. Some of our thinking about that will have to be modified, but I'm not sure how to think about that yet, because we tend to think about the future practices in the way we do today's practice. And while I'd like everybody to open up their thinking, I have to open up mine in that, and we have to look to other disciplines to determine how they would do that and what practices we could pull in. So yes, I believe it's within the realm of possible, but I do believe there are additional controls we'll need to put on the pieces we pull in.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. Hi, John.
Hi, good to see you again.
Same here.
Hey, just a question here, and this may be off topic, but it may be on topic.
Okay.
If SE is disappearing as an organization from AT&L,
Mm-hmm.
how is the Department of Defense going to maintain systems engineering policy and move forward with something like digital engineering?
That's actually not something I can answer, not because I
okay.
can't tell you, but because I'm not in those discussions. I do believe that knowing the quality of the personnel who are working on the reorganization, particularly from the research and engineering side, that is being discussed, but I've not been made privy to it. Our leadership actually does a really good job of allowing us to continue to do our jobs while they keep all of that sort of at their level.
Thank you.
Okay. But if you get a chance to ask Ms. Baldwin, she may be able to give you an answer. Is there somebody over here who had a? No, actually, this gentleman, you want to go? Okay, go ahead, same.
Phil, actually going back to the question about the document generation, you can treat documents simply as a structured response to a query of your database.
Of course.
So if your model is fully integrated and maintained up to any given point in time, then you simply tell the database, here's the subset of the information that I want. In other words, what goes into a particular view or document. And here are the rules for producing that document.
Perfect.
So it spits out a Word document, or it spits out a structured view or it spits out a SysML view, that actually becomes, really, to be honest, pretty trivial. And there are tools that do that.
I actually think most of what we talk about in digital engineering is pretty trivial. I don't know that there's, aside from perhaps the physics-based modeling in areas that we don't yet fully understand the physics, I don't know, and I'm not trying to trivialize the work that I'm doing by any means, right? I still need to pay my electric bill. But I think that the challenges that we have are not in the discovery or the articulation of what those processes might look like, but how we get people to feel comfortable doing that, right? We actually tripped upon the documentation thing because somebody in my chain of command actually said, please don't eliminate your paper artifacts. I'm like, okay, so now how do we work them into the discussion, right? How do we take advantage? Perhaps the simplest step forward is to take advantage to show that you can generate the same quality of documents that they're used to seeing from this new set of tools. Raise your hand. It's the guy with the WWE belt on. Anybody else?
Okay.
One more?
One
Go ahead.
more.
Hi. Whether it's model-based or digital over the years, one of the big obstacles I always get thrown at me is stuff like, well, it's cost and trust.
Yeah.
In other words, yeah, it's nice, sounds good, but I don't have any people that can do it. So it costs a lot of specialized training, but I got to support it. That's a huge change, right, for our organization. The other one is, well, I have a bunch of specialists working on stuff. How do I know?
Yeah.
Because how do I know that I can trust it? How do I know there's thousands of fields of data flying, changing all the time, controlling it? So these are the things that typically get thrown out that kind of says, hey, it kind of really minimizes some of the stuff, and they don't, look at it overcome as obstacles. I'm assuming you guys have dealt with or faced that kind of stuff.
I run into
training
that
stuff.
every day. It's in spades,
So,
right?
have you successfully addressed that with most people?
Well, I don't know if it's successful or not, but here's the way I would address it. Okay, and that's when I had the thing of how do you get started, right? Is you start with what you know. So I would point people, especially in the Department of Defense, to the fact that we use models. We use very complex, more from a traditional M&S standpoint to do our analysis, to inform a decision that's going to be made by a decision maker, right? And that decision maker he might know the model that it came from, but he doesn't know what the input files look like, and he doesn't know, he doesn't know which expert in the stable of experts configured the model or ran it or what they had to do or anything like that. But yet he trusts that result. Break. In a model-based or digital engineering paradigm, we now actually have a system that I believe is built for transparency, and people don't trust it. So the irony is not lost on me, right? But I think it starts with a transition step that I actually have used before in other efforts that I've done, where you actually start by getting people comfortable doing their job with something new. And so they do their job, they take a step forward. And they look around and other people are doing their job, and now that they're comfortable with the new tool, they're going to find an innovative way to use the tool. And before you know it, they're taking a gigantic step forward, and they're actually evolving the practice. So I have used it, not in digital engineering, but I have used that technique before. I mean, I have a degree in mathematics, right? I'm not a student of sociology or human behavior, but I have used that before. And the comfort allows people to build up an inherent trust, whether it's deserved or not. They're going to build up an inherent trust, and then they're going to carry it forward. And before you know it, it becomes their idea, right? Which is fantastic. Then it becomes internalized. The book that I recommended, Crossing the Chasm, actually talks a little bit about that. How do you get people to understand your idea, right? If you listen to me here, and then if you listen to me when I talked at RDECOM, I actually gave the same briefing, but I bet you the words I used were different. Not because the message changed, but because the word I used to communicate with you is different. The English language is very powerful, and so it actually becomes kind of a verbal sleight of hand that we're using to get it. But that's the only way. We do run into it all the time. The book will tell you the people who don't believe are never going to believe, right? I'm never going to buy a new computer, but I buy a new car every year. They get it without asking for it. So it tells you not to worry about them, and it helps you concentrate on the other 4 classes of people. So I don't know if that's a great answer to your question, or if it's even an answer to your question, but I have running into it all the time. My job is to get people convinced.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Phil.
You're welcome.
For giving a very informative presentation. We also want to thank John Hopkins, APL, for providing us the facilities and the support with the advertisements and the brochures and posters. And, you know, without them, we wouldn't look as good. Thank you. And the video equipment and everything. So next thing, what we'll do is we'll give out the book. See, you got, yeah, let me